Buenos días. This is Spanish. No. Good morning, everybody. And thank you very much for coming. I thank very much to the director of Viviana and especially to Timmy for inviting me to share this event with all of you. It's a great honor to be here. I am an editor, and I have published hundreds of all kinds of books, both fiction and non-fiction, for children of all ages. And I have to admit that picture books have always been my favorites, maybe because they are so complex and a challenge for the editor. I will begin with this speech with the first paragraph of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Maybe, I have here. Next is this one. Okay. Okay, this is the first paragraph, and you can read this. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank and of having nothing to do. Once or twice he had peeped into the book her sister was reading, but it has no picture or conversation in it. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversation? This is the book, I take the paragraph. I have this book at home. I'm very proud of having this book, a very old one of the first editions. And it is not easy to answer Alice's question. Maybe there would be many ways to answer it. I will do considering the two main elements that are present in a picture book, the story and the illustrations. What do we understand when we say picture book? It is a book composed of text and illustrations, of course, designed to communicate artistic and literary values and that contribute to stimulate the creativity and sensitivity of children, so they can contribute in some ways to their education. On a picture book, as you know, it's essential to take into account the text, illustrations, and as another people has said here, the design of the book, of the album. At this point, I also want to emphasize that generally the picture book is associated with a children's audience. However, the real fact is that thanks to the symbolic dimension, to the great communicative power and to the enormous expressive capacity, this kind of books have nowadays the most diverse readers. Indeed, we can find multiple narrative levels, and while a child reader simply enjoys the story, an adult reader may also be discovering an underground of irony or a parallel story, and so on in the same story. Today, this kind of books have reached a very sophisticated level with very complex images and stories. And this is what is conquering adult readers, who already constitute an important area of the picture book market nowadays. And although text and illustrations are inseparable on picture books, I will refer first to the text and then to the illustration, only to make clear my exposition. Concerning the story, the text, it is essential to look for original, innovative, and inspiring text, well-written, with interesting and well-structured plots, of those that keep the reader aware of what will happen next, and with a strong and well-profiled characters. This is the point of view of the editor. To have good stories, we obviously need good authors, because writing for children could seem easy at first glance, but it is not at all. First of all, who writes for children must be a good writer, although this is not enough. Maybe the key is to write about the interests of children with the highest literary requirement. And this is a very big challenge. It is nothing to do with writing light or sweetened stories. Well, we saw this just now in the Milena presentation, so deep content in this book. So we know that children are very sincere, logical, and clever critics, and they immediately detect the failures and when a book is not telling them about the reality. The ideal, in my opinion, would be to talk about children's literature without having to add adjective that evaluate it. First of all, children's literature must be literature, and in addition, to be attractive for children. In summary, I find no better definition for a good text than that given by Bruno Bettelheim in his essential The Uses of Enchantment, the Meaning and Importance of Fairy Tales. This book. He defines the definition is to keep children's attention, the story must entertain them and excite their curiosity. But to enrich their life, you have to stimulate their imagination, to help them to develop your intellect and clarify their emotions. It must agree with their anxieties and aspirations. Make them fully recognize difficulties, suggesting solutions to the problems that concern them. On the other hand, picture books are a good place to deal with different topics, such as feelings, understanding, surroundings, and even the most difficult, those issues that we all have to face in our lives sooner or later, such as the death of a loved one, illness, loneliness, war, emigration, and so on. We have extraordinary illustrated big pictures book on the market that speak us about all these difficult issues with very in a respectful way to children's feeling. I would like to highlight some of them as a sample of good stories. First of all, I would like to say that during this speech, and to make things easier, I will give examples of very well-known books for us, for all of us. For instance, we have stories of war and violence. I highlight this Rose Blanche by Roberto Inocente. You remember that the story tells us about a little heroine, Rose Blanche, in Germany during the Second World War. Rose Blanche witnesses the abuse of a small child and follows the track that takes him to a camp. And secretly, Rose Blanche brings food for him and the other children. You know that this is a very strong and sad story, but also full of hope that speaks us about the Holocaust and also about compassion and honesty. Another very nice book speaking about war is this one, Flonflon et Moussette, published by l'École des Loisirs. Flonflon and Moussette are two rabbits, friends forever. They know they will get married when they are older. But then comes the war, and now a hedge of thorns separates Flonflon and Moussette. and the dialogue is, "You shouldn't talk with Mushet. It's forbidden." Why? Because he's on the other side of the world. Another interesting book, in my opinion, is this Why by the Russian illustrator Popov. It's a wordless condemnation of violence and war. You remember the story. A frog sits peacefully in a meadow. Suddenly, for no apparent reason, she is attacked by a mouse with an umbrella in a confrontation that quickly turns into a large-scale war. The author communicates his message with beautiful pastel images on the field, frogs and mice. This book was created to talk to children about the folly of war and how easily anyone can be driven into a cycle of violence. Another book, in this case about immigration, very well known also, is The Arrival by Shaun Tan. Is, as you know, an exciting and deep story about immigration that is told through a series of images without words that seem to come to a forgotten time. A man, his wife and son, in search of a better life, travel with nothing more than a suitcase to an unknown country. It's again a sad story, but at the same time full of hope, of struggle and survival. With the same subject, we have this book, Migrar. This is the Spanish word because it's from Mexico, from Ediciones Tecolote. Migrate is a book by José Manuel Mateo and Javier Martínez Pedro that deals with the harsh reality of Mexican indigenous people when they leave for America in search of a life. It, if not more dignified, yes, more habitable. The story goes before the eyes of an indigenous child who tells us how his father worked the land that, although it was not theirs, loved and cared for it as if it were. Another important subject is death. This book is illustrated by Sonia Danowski and was originally published in China by a publishing house called CCPPG. The name of the book is Grandma Lives in Fragrance Village. This beautiful illustrated book treats in a very sensitive way Xiao's Li's last visit to his grandmother, who is very sick. A very important area in picture books, well, in literature for children in general, but mainly in picture books, is humor. I would like to highlight and I would like to extend a little bit on this subject because it's very important. Humor is a clear invitation to reader, to the literary experience. It is a very interesting literary resource when establishing good communication with the reader. As children grow and improve their use of language, they are able to understand increasingly complex humor structures. Through humor, all kinds of topics can be presented to children, even the most difficult ones. Fortunately, we can find good examples of intelligent and transgressive humor in the market. Stories full of irony, the mythification of the characters, and the surreal humor of impossible situations. And those kind of books have been appearing more and more in picture books. a brilliant author, a master of intelligent humor and complicity with both children and adults, has been undoubtedly Roald Dahl, as you know. Among all his books, I think that this book, Revolting Rhymes, is one of the most prominent. As you know, Revolting Rhymes is a collection of poems by Roald Dahl published in 1982. Dahl, here in this book, offers a parody of traditional folk tales in verse, an intelligent reinterpretation of 6 well-known fairy tales with surprising endings instead of the happy traditional ones. I must say that the poems were illustrated by Quentin Blake, and it is the shortest children's book he has written, and in my opinion is surely the most comical. Following with humor, we can also find surprise and eschatological topics that are at the root of the humor. You know this book also. The little ones like very much this kind of humor, performs with delicacy. We all know this title, illustrated by Ulf Elbruch. You remember the story when little Mo looks through the hole one morning, plop, something lands on his head. Who has done it? This is the story. And now I will refer to strictly to the illustration on picture books. Maurice Sendak, as you remember, Maurice Sendak, Leo Leoni, Tommy Ungerer, among others, were the first illustrators who began to consider the books for children as a new artistic form. They presented important topics and formal innovation that completely changed the world of children's picture books. We know that illustration sends a visual and imaginative message to the reader. And it's some picture books where the child will have his first encounter with abstracter fantasy, where sometimes with the help of an adult, children will discover the relationship between visual and verbal language. We can affirm that the picture books is the door that leads children towards the complex processes of learning to read. In children's thinking, feelings, and sensation play an important function. The relationship between words and images is very important in this child's learning stage. I believe that to feed an aesthetic dimension of the children, to sensitize them with the current artistic expression, is to offer them more possibilities to understand the world around them, and as a consequence, to provide their creative answers in the future. In my opinion, a picture book must achieve coherence both from the point of view of the text and illustration. The illustrations facilitate the author's communication with the reader, providing temporary and geographical setting, the configuration of the character, and the visualization of objects and elements. Illustration makes the text more understandable, complementing it. In picture books, the image has not only an aesthetic proposal, but is a way of communication. Children, through illustration, can learn about the world around them or even move to fantasy spaces. Illustrations are the first thing that readers see in a picture book, their first impression of the story. The image create the atmosphere of the story and offers the reader the possibility of a dialogue. A talented illustrator enriches the text by contributing with something new to the story, bringing different reading levels or perhaps different point of view and looking for the depth in the characters of the story. And now we come to the crucial question, how to integrate those two elements, text and illustrations. As I said before, I have published many illustrated books, and I have experienced how difficult it is to find books in which images and text are well integrated. I have often seen picture books in which both the text and the images were consistent, but I could not find in them any depth or value. They were banal books, poor, without any brightness. On another occasions, I have seen books with a strong text and poor illustrations, and on the contrary, good illustrations and a mediocre and an attractive text. For an editor, this is very difficult. I think that the key to making a successful picture book depends on the good relation between text and image. Because we know that a picture book is a whole, a set with the graphic image and literary narrative must complement each other, must work well together. Illustration prolongs the meaning of the story, and the story looks for a way to fantasy, leading to the path of the new and different. The illustration creates the atmosphere of the work. Both the colors and the technique that the illustrator uses indicates the environment in which the story is located, providing information to the reader about the character and setting the tone. The illustrations suggest a humorous, poetic, ironic context of the story and takes position in relation to what is stated by the author. They offer to the reader the opportunity for a dialogue. When the reader looks at the image, it produces sensations such as laughter, fear, surprise, tenderness, and so on. We can affirm that the illustration in picture books is much more than an ornament, of course. It is not only intended to facilitate the reading of text, it's a real way of communication, a creative and aesthetic experience. In a picture book, the text and the image are interdependent. That means that both artistic languages complement each other and that both of them interact. A dialogue is established between them. A good coordination between these two codes, between text and image, is very enriching for a reader who must interpret two different codes, verbal and visual codes. The child's imagination plays with these two registers and achieves many resources both from a literary and artistic point of view. The difficult task of integrating text and images is easier, obviously, when the author and illustrator are the same person, because the idea that the author has to carry out with his work is the spine in both the text and the illustration that accompanies it. Although it is not a simple task for an illustrator to be the author of his own stories. An interesting type of illustrated books are those that are fully told without illustration, wordless books, sometimes with only a few words. In those books, readers have the opportunity to create their own story with their own words, as Milena showed us now. Some outstanding examples of this type of picture books would be, in my opinion, this one, the Snowman. You know, this is by Raymond Briggs, where a child builds a snowman on a winter day, and by night at 12 o'clock, the snowman comes alive. Another very interesting wordless picture book is The Way by Susie Lee. It's a cute and funny book of images without words about a girl who spent a day at the beach. Another illustrator I would like to highlight is the Belgian artist Kitty Crowder. She is a perfect example of what we are speaking about. In Kitty Crowder books, text and images form a whole, always. Very interesting book. But if I had to choose an album as an example to summarize all I have said so far, that could be Voices in the Park by, well, those are another examples by Kitty Crowder. This, Voices in the Park by Anthony Brown. I have always been fascinated not only for the quality of these illustrations, but also by the depth, the message, and the powerful story of this book. Readers will discover something new every time they open this book. It was published in 1998 by DK Children. And as I said, Anthony Brown is the author and the illustrator. The story is fully told by 4 characters, gorillas, they are gorillas, so that the reader can see each other's perspective. They are radically different perspectives of the same walk in the park, give this story a fascinating depth. It talks about important topics such as friendship, loneliness, and hope. Anthony Brown offers to the readers a psychologically complex work in which the landscape is a manifestation of the character's feeling and references. He also winks to the art world. This is a clear example of picture book for both adult and children's readers, which can be read on many different levels. Therefore, readers should discover how to perceive and interpret what the illustrator wants to tell. The story is written about adult issues, but in a simple way so that children will be able to understand. The story is retold 4 times from the 4 perspectives. Mother signifies wealthy, father poor, boy shy, because he's very shy, and girl outgoing. An important thing is that the fonts are different for each character, which made it easier to follow the 4 voices. Well, another good example would be, this book, of course, Where the Wild Things Are, and what Sendak recounts the inner journey of a child to master his fears. In this book, there are clearly portrayed feelings such as anger and hatred, which did not portray any books at that time when the book was written in 1963. What makes this book a masterpiece is the way the author works at many levels. He reflects the depth of the young protagonist's feeling through color, form, and composition. Picture books are stories that, as said before, integrate text and illustration, and they have a very, very strong graphic preponderance also. This type of books are visual reading that they need the reader to make a narrative interpretation beyond words. The author and the illustrator need the complicity of their readers. In conclusion, picture books with literary and artistic qualities brings pleasure to children and adults. They are a source of inspiration for readers and a way to think with creativity and imagination, and to stimulate the interest in reading. In most cases, we have simple and at the same time deep stories with multiple reading levels. Sometimes the meaning arises from the interaction between the word and the image, and one without the other would not make sense if they were experienced separately. I have never doubted that it is worth to accept the challenge of publishing this kind of extraordinary books that contribute to the intellectual, emotional, and artistic development of children. Thank you very much.